Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Yeah, the Democrats sure seem to have their priorities in order. Now, the first thing you need to know about this case is that Kilmer Garcia is an illegal alien. Bet you didn't know that, did you? Because the white media doesn't really mention that. You look at all these white media headlines about this guy, even when you Google his name and illegal immigrant, you see that practically none of the search results mention that. And that's crucial because 90% of people who go online for news never get any further than the headlines. Now, I know that as people who get your news and views from the black media, you do read the headlines. Or at the very least, you listen to us because we read more than just the headlines. But understand, the vast majority of people don't. And the white media knows that. They're not in the business of entertainment or information. They're in the business of mind control. So if the headlines do not explicitly say illegal alien Kilmer Garcia or Kilmer Garcia illegal alien, then 90+% of the people who see this story online won't know that. And it goes without saying that if you watch white media content on TV, they don't mention it there either. But the reality is this guy is an illegal alien. He admitted that he illegally broke into the U.S. back in 2011. Then in 2019, an immigration judge decided to prevent him from being removed. Now, of course, we gotta wonder why it took 8 years for this guy to get brought before a judge. But you can bet that this guy was already hooked up with a job, which may or may not pay him under the table. And of course, he gets full access to the government programs and corporate programs for immigrants, which is what they'll call him merely because he sought asylum. And this is where we have the weasel words that come from the white left. They say, well, if somebody is granted an asylum hearing, then that means they're not an illegal alien because they actually do have a legal status. Sure, they're not in the country legally, but they have legal status in that they're waiting until their day in court. So see, they're not in the country illegally. They've got legal status. That's the weasel words the white left likes to use. And by the way, illegal aliens know this, which is why, starting during the Obama years, the number of illegals who began claiming asylum skyrocketed. They knew exactly what the hustle was, what the loophole was to use. Now, in Garcia's case, he claimed to the judge that he shouldn't be deported back to El Salvador because he says there's a gang in El Salvador that was targeting his family's pupusa business. You heard that right. He's not fleeing political or religious persecution. He comes from a family that owns at least a restaurant of some sort. Pupusas are a Salvadoran cuisine. And rather than his family using their money to hire an immigration attorney, they instead just thought it would be faster and easier for him to storm northward and claim asylum. Asylum is supposed to be for people fleeing state persecution or fleeing insurgents who have taken over the country, that kind of thing. The problem in Latin America, though, is gangs. This is a cultural problem. Now, the U.S. has always had a problem with gangs going back at least to the mid-19th century, but it really got out of hand when so many migrants from south of the border brought gangs to the U.S. And what's the reason for that? It's because the gangs in Latin America have taken over countries because everything down there is all about family, which the way they do things is just another word for nepotism. And the problem with rampant nepotism is that people immediately try to get all their idiot siblings and cousins and in-laws into positions of authority, and once there, they begin ripping the place off and writing rules to make it impossible to get rid of them. They basically enshrine themselves as a royal family. That's the problem with nepotism. Anyone who's ever had to deal with an HOA knows how that works. This is what happened in Latin America. You can't punish the gangs because everybody has gang members in their families, or they themselves are in or affiliated with a gang. This is why in El Salvador, that Bukele character decided to stop playing around. He created a maximum security facility and armed it like a fortress. He made sure that those reprobates had no access to phones, because that's how these gang leaders run their criminal organizations from behind bars. And you know what? It worked. Now, you got the white left as well as a number of other assorted bleeding hearts who apparently are just so shocked and appalled at what Bukele is doing. The truth of the matter is these people wouldn't go to El Salvador before now if you paid them. El Salvador is literally the only place in Latin America where the murder rate is in the low single digits. By far, by a country mile, El Salvador is now much safer than any other place on that continent. El Salvador went from being the place that was literally called the murder capital of the world to being the only place in Latin America where the cost of living is going up and the chances of being killed are going down. You have El Salvadorans who are talking about how they fled the country because of the violence, but now they're coming back because it's never been so safe. Bukele is a businessman, by the way, and he wants his country to become an economic power, no doubt for his own personal enrichment. But he knows that nobody wants to do business in a place where you have a 90% chance of getting killed. Shop owners being murdered if they don't pay protection money, and in many cases, they kill the business owners if they pay protection to a rival gang. That's what was going on in El Salvador. But now murders have dropped by 97%. Keep in mind, El Salvador is the home of MS-13. That's where that gang started. And yet El Salvador got those animals under control, to the point now that the people who fled are now beginning to come back to El Salvador. This is the El Salvador that this Garcia character says is so dangerous and he's terrified for his life and all the rest of it, and that the gangs are going to get him. The same El Salvador that's declared war on the gangs finally and is locking them up en masse. MS-13 has far less influence and control in El Salvador than they do in the United States. The chances of MS-13 getting to Garcia are much greater in America because nobody's actually targeting these gangs to be mass rounded up. But there's also something else that needs to be mentioned here. The assertion by the government is that Garcia himself is a member of MS-13, according to a source. The government's main accusation against Garcia is that he's an MS-13 member engaged in human trafficking. Apparently there was a traffic stop that took place in Tennessee and there were up to 8 other people in the car. When the people in the car were asked what their addresses were, they gave the same address as Garcia's. On top of that, when he was questioned by police, he was evasive with them, pretended to speak less English than he actually knew, and as far as law enforcement was concerned, they felt that this was a case of human trafficking. That's what put them on his trail in the first place. Never mind the fact that this man's still an illegal alien subject to deportation at any time, and yet apparently he was able to get his hands on not just a driver's license, but a car too. He has a ton of tattoos, very much like the kind that MS-13 members wear, which is very strange for someone who claimed to have been so terrified of them. The majority of immigrants to the United States are not fleeing persecution. The vast majority of them, 99%, are economic migrants. They're coming to take advantage of the massive wealth that foundational Black Americans made possible. That's what actually happened. The people who are actually coming because they're being persecuted in some form or another, you could count them all on one hand. It's not that serious. But that's what people have been saying because they know that once you say, I'm seeking asylum, then, they'll go ahead and let you in and say, we'll let you stay, and some judge will get back to you, and then that's the end of it. The point is, this guy was in the U.S. illegally. He never had a right to be in the United States. He had a judge who withheld his removal, which simply meant that he couldn't be deported to El Salvador, but he could be deported to another country. Now that's something else that the white media has been telling you, isn't it? Something else that these white leftists haven't mentioned. The judge in his case basically said that he couldn't be deported to El Salvador, but at no point did anyone say that he couldn't be deported anywhere else. So the people who are ready to commit hara-kiri over phony claims that the law is being trampled, the only thing that's happening is that a judge's order wasn't followed to the letter. Had Trump sent Garcia to Nicaragua or Colombia or Chile or Panama, those are countries other than El Salvador, and the judge's order would have given him full permission to do that, but then the critics would be saying, but he doesn't know anyone in those countries, and they'd be demanding that he remain in the U.S. regardless. This is not about his safety. And keep in mind, this guy came to the U.S. when he was a teenager. It's not like he was brought here as some sort of anchor baby. This guy already was a teenager, dang near a grown man. Again, I'm sure that's another fine point that hasn't gotten much mention, has it? And by the way, I don't like this Bukele guy, not simply because he's mobbed up with the Republican Party, but because you can just smell that he's the kind of Blanco Latin American ruler who messed up those places in the first place. But this morning's briefing isn't about what I think of Bukele. The question is, did he solve his country's gang problem? The answer is, he did. People can complain that his solution was draconian, but then again, he was facing an apocalyptic scenario. It doesn't really get much worse than what they had down there. And he didn't solve the problem by trying to be nice with the gangs, or put them in counseling, or try not to offend any of the gang members' family members. He treated those degenerates like a virus. He contained them and quarantined them. Now, this Garcia fellow, he's had U.S. senators go down there to see him, and a group of members of Congress, and they make sure to have the intersectional one in all the photos, leading the charge. Now, not one of these same people is saying boo about reparations or an anti-black hate crime bill, but they're ready to jump out a window for someone who's not even a U.S. citizen. You don't have to get on a plane and fly 9 hours to El Salvador to find injustice or people being ruthlessly deprived of their rights. You got that happening all the time right here. You have people, black people, being arrested, thrown in jail, tortured, beaten to death, locked in solitary confinement for months, if not longer in many cases, and it happens without a lot of them ever having been put on trial, or in some cases, without them ever having been formally charged. These are citizens that this happens to, citizens of the United States right here. And it's not fine points of some made-up asylum claim. It's the most basic parts of the U.S. Constitution that are being violated every single day. But Democrats aren't making noise for us, and there's no political profit to be had by pointing to actual injustice. What they're doing is political theater. The goal is to give the false impression that this guy is a U.S. citizen. That's the reason why they don't mention it. They're trying to make it seem as if this is a U.S. citizen who was unjustly deported. So now senators and congressmen have to rush to his aid and pretend like this is some sort of hostage situation. You didn't see these politicians showing this much concern for Brittany Griner. And not only is she an American citizen, she's famous. Democrats are going above and beyond not only for a constituency that voted for Trump, but also for people who aren't even citizens and can't vote for them to begin with. All you shills and plants for the DNC, please explain to us why Democrats are making a cause celeb out of this. You haven't heard Democrats say a solitary word about black people since the election. And it wasn't because black voter turnout was down. It's because the Democrats are doubling down on their strategy of trying to manufacture a new voter base, one comprised of as many non-black constituencies as possible. That way the Democrats won't be susceptible or vulnerable to the political pressure that black people have been putting on them. The Democrats' goal is to gain office and hold it, but to do so without having to do anything for black people. They don't care if they lose elections. What they care about is winning them the right way, which for them means do it in a way where black people get nothing and nobody begins to get the idea that people better start listening to black voters and doing things for black voters. And just one more point. It matters that the Democrats are ignoring black people. I know it doesn't matter to the shills, they're in business for themselves, but it matters to us. Now, when a political party is ready to move heaven and earth for non-citizens, while going out of their way to ignore people who are citizens, then can anyone honestly claim that that political party is working for the American people? Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Reasonable Dude, LB, Mark Singleton, Asfeo Dingaswayo, and Gregory Franklin. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.